lot about neuroscience lately. Well, I'm going to stand here for the convenience of the audio then. So we have learned a lot about neuroscience in the past few decades, and there is one thing that neuroscientists are finally agreeing on, which is this. The brain is an advanced predictive engine. We have evolved our brains to be constantly on fast forward, and this is because natural selection favors those who can accurately anticipate the future. Our ancestors who accurately anticipated what would happen next are still our ancestors. Those who didn't are no longer our ancestors. So we're constantly evolving our brains to anticipate the future, and I'm mentioning this because in a room full of marketers and people who care about the content, predictive analytics, predictive anything, has become so popular lately. We're constantly challenging ourselves to consider our customers' next move and meet them there. So the purpose for today's presentation is to learn what happens in the brain, literally, physically, neurologically, when we anticipate the future, so that we can offer our customers things they actually want. And we have time for 3 such processes. And let's start with the first one that's related to mental schemas. What are these? These are templates or scripts that we create in our brains in order to process information quickly and efficiently. For instance, all of you have some mental schemas right now of how business meetings go, how the grocery store that you typically shop at looks and feels. When you go to an airport, you have a mental schema. Even for the conference today, you have a mental representation of what that might look like. And mental schemas are adaptive because we can process information very quickly and we can respond appropriately. And as a result, we save a lot of mental energy. It would be exhausting to treat each situation as new each time. And if given the choice for the brain to think or not to think, it definitely chooses not to think. If given the choice for the brain to conserve energy or not to, it definitely wants to conserve energy, which is why people fall asleep during presentations. We're constantly on the lookout for saving energies, and mental schemas help us do just that. Quite often, if we are exposed frequently to the same situations, those turn to be very automatic for us. So we process things very fast and automatically. Think about your language habits. For instance, if I were to display a sentence like this, notice how it takes you just a little bit of extra time to process it accurately. At first, you're perhaps surprised, and then the more you stay with the sentence, then you make sense of it. But the reason it took you a little bit longer is because I disrupted a linguistic schema, which quite often is automatic for all of us. So mental schemas help the brain process information very accurately, and the more we're exposed to stimuli, the more we get familiar with them. And familiarity feels so good to the brain just because it gives us a satisfaction of anticipating the future. Familiarity is very juicy to the brain. It feeds us with that feeling that, oh, I know what is going to happen next. So as a logical conclusion, we could delight our customers by simply giving them something that feels and looks familiar. However, there is a caution about familiarity. If we're exposed to stimuli way too frequently, we start to habituate. How many of you participated in the session that I delivered at the beginning of the year in a similar setup like this when we were talking about habituation? All 3 people in the room may remember from that session, we were talking about this idea that whenever the brain is exposed to some stimulation, it pays attention to it at first, but then gradually starts paying less and less attention to it until it becomes just that, some background. Let's just say that you are at your work and you're having some music in the background. At first you pay attention, but then you no longer do. And habituation has evolutionary value because it would drive you nuts if you couldn't habituate, let's just say, to the sound of your own breathing or to some buzzing light. But humans habituate very, very quickly. Imagine this. When it came to communication, at first we were just satisfied to speak in caves and face-to-face, and now it's perfect. Then we evolved from that, and we established new means of communication, and those became rewarding. Then we evolved a little bit more. We now communicate in various ways. We evolved and progressed even more from that. And we kept on going and pushing evolution. And these days, if you are flying at 30,000 feet in the air and your internet connection is down, life is over as you know it. Because here's the thing that will help us all understand about the brain. It habituates very fast, and once it receives a reward, it is ready for the next reward. And sometimes if that reward gets to be increased in some way, then that becomes the benchmark, that becomes the threshold, and that becomes something that we're then familiar with, and that feels satisfying. So you have to be cautious when it comes to familiarity because, yes, it feeds our predictive accuracy, but we can also habituate to that very fast, and then we expect the next reward. You'll enjoy this experiment that took place at UC Berkeley in the 20s. There was a researcher by the name of Otto Tinklepaw. How would you like to have that last name? Otto Tinklepaw at UC Berkeley did this study with monkeys. And the experiment went something like this. He would have a monkey sit on a chair, and this monkey would observe the researcher hide the piece of lettuce under one of the two cups. And the monkey would look at this, and he would kind of pay attention to where the lettuce is, and then the researcher would take the monkey out of the room, and then bring the monkey back into the room and observe what the monkey does. And it would take the monkey about 3 to 4 seconds to rush directly to the cup underneath which the lettuce was hidden. And he would repeat this experiment week after week until it became almost a habit. So the monkey would take, with each time, less and less time to find the hidden lettuce. So then the researcher changed the stimulus. So instead of hiding a piece of lettuce under one of the two cups, he started now hiding a banana under one of the two cups. And the monkey would do the same. He would sit on the chair, observe the experimenter, hide the banana now, go out the room, come back into the room. And the researcher observed the increased now satisfaction from the monkey because obviously bananas are more preferable than lettuce. So he repeated on that experiment for a while until that became habit. And then he did something mean. Instead of hiding a banana, he went back to hiding the lettuce under one of the two cups and observed the monkey and what it would do then. So the monkey would come back into the room, he would rush for the cup, take it away, and then see the lettuce, and then he would look under the other cup, and then he would look around, and he would look under the chair, and everywhere else in the room, and he would get so mad that he would even start throwing the cups, and he would not touch the lettuce. It's important for us to understand these kinds of experiments because once you have gotten the brain accustomed to some sort of reward, it's impossible to go down a level because now there's familiarity and there's expectation around that reward. So the practical guideline for all of us is to consider your content and things that you're giving to your own audiences and ask, are you giving your audiences lettuce when they're expecting bananas? So as we investigate what happens in the brain in terms of predicting what happens next, we know that familiarity works, but we also know that there is some expectation of the next reward. And I enjoy this phrase, freedom within a framework, because in order to give somebody something that feels familiar, you have to know their framework, you have to know their mental schema, and twist it just a little bit so that you do not insist on habituation too much, because exposure to the same stimulus after a while, yes, it does feel familiar, and yes, it does feel predictable, but it will become boring and therefore not attention-getting. I'm enjoying these pictures that you see online that are variations of Mona Lisa. The reason we enjoy these kinds of variations, and I'll give you some examples, is because we already know the framework, we already know the mental schema, we have a mental representation of what the Mona Lisa looks like, whether you've seen her in person or you've seen accurate replicas of her. The reason we enjoy some of these variations is because we are now used to what she should look like, we're familiar with some mental representation, but then there is a twist. When you get a chance, type into Google Mona Lisa variations, and you'll see her in all sorts of different outfits, in all sorts of different poses, from Miss Piggy to Lara Croft to Mr. Bean to Snow White. She also has all sorts of accessories, such as cigarettes and gas masks. You see her holding a fat cat. She has a tiara. She has rollers in her hair. Sometimes she has no hair. And inevitably, she will have some of the bigger breasts. The reason that they get our attention is because people have played within a framework. So when you're reflecting on your own content and you're thinking what really happens in the brain when we try to predict what happens next, is we have something familiar, but also something that is taking us off the beaten path. So make sure that you match the level of rewards that your audiences are expecting, if not exceeding it slightly, and also find their frameworks and twist them just so slightly so that you avoid habituation. We're talking a lot about familiarity and the fact that once we're exposed to some stimulation, we become very used to it. And in a sense, we expect it, which is a second process that happens in the brain when we try to predict what happens next. With so much overexposure to a stimulus, we learn to expect the next moment. And expectations are very interesting to us to study as scientists and as marketers, just because you cannot turn them off in the brain. The brain is constantly mapping out what it will do next. Anything from walking to completing projects to making love, all of these take place in the mind first. Expectations feel very good to the brain because expectations are how we predict the future. So the psychology or the neuroscience of expectations is intriguing because the brain is constantly on that fast-forward motion, and it learns how to expect, how to know how to expect what happens next based on familiarity and obviously being exposed to things. So even this morning, you had some expectations of the traffic. You had some expectations of your reaction to some food you had here. You have some expectations of this session. You cannot turn off the brain's constant tendency to form expectations. And when our expectations are met, it is great because that means we have predictive accuracy. When they're not met, that means there's a prediction error. And that is a teaching moment. Prediction errors are teaching moments for the brain. This is how we learn how to adapt. For instance, as you look at that piece of wood, you can expect that it may be a house, but then if somebody told you actually it's part of a ship, you see how there is that gap between what you expect and what happens in real life, where the brain learns how to adapt. This is huge because now we're putting neuroscience behind the common phrase that we hear often, which is, are you meeting people's expectations? Why is it that we want to meet people's expectations? From the brain's perspective, is because we're enabling them to accurately predict the future. However, if we're just simply meeting people's expectation is not enough because habituation at some point will take place. This is why prediction error, even though we have that word error in there, and may sound negative, is not entirely bad because prediction error is how the brain learns how to adjust. And expectations are so strong in the brain that quite often we turn them into self-fulfilling prophecies. Scientists are constantly showing how across many situations, expectations turn into something that actually happen in real life. So for instance, as scientists, we study students and we notice that students who expect to do well in school actually do. We study adults who expect to do well at work and actually do. We study people who expect to do well and believe they will do well in relationships, and they actually do. And this is why, as we look at across the spectrum around expectations, what they have in common is that they activate the areas in the brain that generate beliefs, expectations, and the brain's reward center. This is why expectations work so well, and we'll speak about placebo pills in a minute, which are also so potent. But it's intriguing to us that it's not only beliefs that feed expectations, it's also tools. So for instance, if you look at things such as lucky charms or lucky numbers or even lucky underwear, any of you are wearing your lucky socks today? Maybe some of the speakers, or if you're here to network. Those are not magic. Science is showing us that there is a hook that some of these tools are creating in our brains, and they're improving our self-efficacy. When it comes to lucky socks, for instance, the reason that they actually work in real life is because they remove anxiety, which has a negative impact on performance. So in fact, if you are wearing lucky socks during an interview, it can definitely help out. Expectations are so strong in the brain that they have a self-fulfilling prophecy. And one field that it has been studied, almost overly studied, is this related to placebo pills. Placebo pills are very intriguing to scientists because we're constantly asking, how is it possible that something that does not have medication can actually be useful to us? And we're noticing across many, many studies that placebo pills have an improved effect on those who report certain levels of pain. Obviously, they won't cure cancer, but If you're suffering from anxiety, from depression, sexual dysfunction, insomnia, digestive disorders, and even tremors in Parkinson's disease, placebo pills can be helpful. And what do all of these conditions have in common? They have in common the fact that these pills are triggering the areas of the brain that generate beliefs, expectations, and the anticipation of reward. That is huge. These pills are now becoming so potent that obviously some people call them lies, which in a sense they are, but they are lies that heal. So there's an ethical dilemma that as doctors we have. So when we look at a patient, doctors these days have a script they have to say when they prescribe the pills. So they'll give you this jar of pills and they will say, you realize there is no medicine in these pills. However, these pills have helped patients in your condition, and I believe that they will help you too. Would you be more enticed to take them? I know I would if I suffered from any of those conditions. This is so potent because technology, for instance, such as MRI or EEG, are now helping us pinpoint the neurological foundation of placebo pills. And what is it that we're discovering? We're discovering this, that whenever the brain is faced with pain or fear or stress, does that describe many of your customers and many audiences that you're dealing with? Pain, fear, and stress. Whenever the brain is faced with those, it already has the ability to generate its own analgesic compounds that are called opioids. And those are already having a natural healing system. So these inert pills have the ability to trigger those natural opioids. Imagine when you hear an alarm and you see some fire, you're already on the lookout for an escape. You're already almost propelled into action. These pills do the same thing. It triggers the body's natural ability to propel itself into action. The brain already knows the course to take if you know how to tap into that. So how does that apply to any of the content that we create? Hook into the fact that the brain cannot turn off its expectation system. And often that expectation system is based on beliefs. So whenever you have the chance to hook into someone's belief of hope and optimism for the future, but don't stop there. Also provide a tool that can fortify that belief. A while back, if we're to look at the case study here, a while back, do you remember a campaign that was created by Kleenex? They went on Facebook. This was an agency from Israel. They went on Facebook and they realized that at that time of the year, a lot of people were getting colds. So they found out through all sorts of friends the physical addresses of these people, and they sent, a little creepy, and they sent to these people a box of Kleenex saying, we believe this will get you better. So imagine you're hooking into the belief and you're providing a tool which is almost like a placebo pill. Obviously, a box of Kleenex is not going to suddenly cure your cold, but it already taps into the brain's natural healing system. Reflect on your content and wonder this, are you tapping into that same resource? The brain already knows how to reach the finish line. It has the resources to get to the finish line if you know how to hook into those resources. And oftentimes our content is, in fact, a placebo pill. So as we look at resource number 2, constantly wonder, how can I hook into existing beliefs for hope and optimism, and also provide a tool that is strong enough to activate the brain natural system for getting to the finish line. And here is the final element. We're talking about this balance between something that feels familiar to the brain, that feels expected, but also something that offers a slight twist, because otherwise habituation would settle in. And we call that element simply an element of surprise. So as we look at this, we realize that we are faced with a biological puzzle. On one hand, we tend to prefer something that is familiar to us, but on the other hand, we prefer something that feels quite new, because how many of you would like to be surprised? There's quite often I run a survey where I ask people, if I were to tell you the exact date and time where your most cherished goals would be fulfilled, would you choose to know it? And often I get the answer, no, I wouldn't choose to know it. I enjoy being surprised. And even as we run MRI studies, for instance, if I were to put your brains in an MRI machine and I would show you some pictures of, let's just say, landscapes, And I would show them to you so fast that the conscious brain could not possibly recognize them. Outside of the MRI machine, if I showed you two pictures now, one of the pictures that you've seen sort of in the MRI machine and one that is new, guess which one do you prefer? You tend to prefer the familiar one. Familiarity feels good to the brain because it feeds predictability. But your conscious brain says, I actually want to be surprised. I enjoy some novelty. I enjoy seeing things that I haven't seen before. So as communicators, we have to constantly wonder what is the balance and what is the right proportion between something that people expect and something that people don't expect. And the question that I've been pondering as a cognitive scientist and looking at how the brain processes information is how do we give pleasure to non-homogeneous audiences? Because obviously, as people read your content or they come and listen to you or they interface with you in some way, some people already may know some things that you have to say and some people don't. So you're addressing constantly people of different levels. And I've been inspired by some of the studies that have been done on one of the greatest movies of all times, The Simpsons. And the reason I'm intrigued by this is because the producers of this show had to be very careful about including enough details to keep the attention of various levels of audiences, people from high school to university to college, and they asked, could we even get the attention of PhDs with The Simpsons? And it wasn't actually that hard for them to do because many of you may know this, producers of The Simpsons and also some of their writers went to Harvard and Yale, and they boast all sorts of degrees in math and physics, and they know how to sustain the attention in a subtle way, even for some of the experts. So for instance, imagine this. There's an episode in The Simpsons where Homer and Marge are trying to help this other couple, a baseball player and his wife Tabitha. Does anybody remember that episode? They're trying to offer marriage advice, kind of ironic, to this other couple. And they are seen in this episode at the baseball game where Tabitha wants to now proclaim her love for this baseball player. And in this setup at the baseball game, there is a Jumbotron that shows up. And right before Tabitha is going to appear on this Jumbo Vision thing, you can see for just a few seconds this multiple choice question. Now, to the neophyte audience, this may look like just an innocent multiple choice question. Does anybody know what these numbers mean? Was there somebody who actually knew? What's that? You're on to something, but notice that the first one is a perfect number, which means that as you look at a number, you have some divisors, so you can divide that number by specific numbers. And in this case, the reason this is a perfect number is because if you add up its divisors, it adds up to the number itself, which is why it's considered a perfect number. 6 is another example of a perfect number. It can be divided by 1, 2, and 3, and if you add up 1, 2, and 3, you get 6. 28 is another example of a perfect number. You can divide it by 1, 2, 4, 7, and 14. You add up those numbers, you get 28. The next perfect number is 496, and the next perfect number after that, it's this one right here. So imagine for a mathematician or people who are advanced in this field, they could very instantly get this. It's like, oh wow, that was an example of a perfect number, that was clever. How about the other one? The other one is considered a narcissistic number. And this means that when you take each number individually that compose that number and you raise it to the power of 4, and now you add them up, you get that initial number. And because the number can recreate itself from its own digits, it's considered that it's a number that is in love with itself, therefore, therefore a narcissistic number. And that third one is considered a Marseille number. This is by the name of the mathematician, French mathematician who discovered it about 17th century. This guy looked at numbers and he noticed that there are some numbers that if you raise them to the power of 13th minus 1 is that Marseille number. So any number to the power of p, which can be any prime number, minus 1 carries its name. So imagine this scene was on The Simpsons for just a few brief seconds. If you have no knowledge in this field, it would have passed you by just like that. It would have been an innocent multiple choice question. I'm enjoying this example because it is a perfect one for showing how you can have an increased level of sophistication in giving the brain something that feels familiar. Obviously, an innocent multiple choice question feels familiar to all of us, but you can also take it by surprise, even for the most experienced of audiences. So as you investigate your own content, wonder this: am I giving the brain something that it expects and something that it does not expect? And am I providing a level of satisfaction even to the most advanced audiences that are coming to listen to me? How are we doing on time? I know that we're running a little bit late. Do we have a few more minutes, 2 more minutes? So as you're seeing this, this chart right here, I would love to accept 1 or 2 questions, depending on, Scott is my boss. I will repeat the question. As you're seeing this, are there any reactions? Because neuroscience has been such a popular field lately. We have made great advancements. We used to know 30 regions in the brain. Now we know more than 300. And the more that we can understand some of these guidelines, do we know everything about the brain? Definitely not. But the more we understand some of the things that we do know, the more we can be educated about what happens in the brain, especially as we try to predict the next moment. What do y'all think? Yes.
I think it's very interesting. The themes you're bringing out are very similar to the themes in Stephen Kinger's book
About styles. Writing and style, or style, what's the name of that book?
And glamour and things like that. Like that example you gave about the old man in the boat. That's what you would call these trees, these grammar trees that are coming close to each other and therefore confusing.
So the remark, more than a question, was that some of these principles would apply to the way that we write and to the way that we look at style. And all of you, all of you, I'm sure, are writers in some way. Steven Pinker is a great book. That phenomenon that you saw exemplified there was called a garden path phenomenon, which takes you on one path but derails you ever so slightly, so that it disrupts some existing schemas. Yeah, go for it. I enjoy that question. The question is about, are there specific tools to make sure that you have a balance between familiarity and surprise? And when we look at that, we look at it in terms of proportions. And I'm glad that you're mentioning this, because you'll constantly have to think, what is something that people recognize versus something that will take them by surprise? Because if you overdo each side with too much recognition, you get boredom and you get people to snooze. With too much surprise, now suddenly you're weird. So the way to find that out is to go back to an old adage of knowing your audiences, because, for instance, I know I can push it a little bit more with you because you're already at an advanced level, but with neophytes, you would say more on the recognition side versus the surprise side. So often speaking to experts is different than speaking to beginners, because experts already have the mental schemas that we're talking about. Those are a lot more developed, so they know what feels familiar, what feels surprising instantly. Whereas to the beginner's brain, they don't have those mental schemas developed so well. So those proportions quite often depend on the level of expertise that you're addressing. We have time for one more?
Novelty and familiarity. In pop music, there's a great example of that, of an organic version of that in the Beatles. Familiar forms that they did something new with. In modern pop music, and I'm an old guy, but a lot of modern pop music sucks, because I think they've overthought the balance between the two of those, and it's an artificial balance. So how do you get around that?
Ooh, I'm enjoying that remark. There is the remark that sometimes in current music, we're overdoing the balance of novelty versus familiarity. And how do we get around that? We come back to what is it that the audience is willing to pay for, and how much distress are they willing to put up with? Because generationally, we may prefer more familiar. Why do you think some music feels so good? Because you already know it. So musicians have that challenge at their fingertips, And with data analytics, which would probably transition us into some additional speeches, you could probably get more of that balance. So here's a tool that perhaps you can develop as you investigate the impact of your own content. Now be cognizant and aware of the proportions that you're playing with. Let's just say that you're starting with a 70-30, 70 familiarity that you have in one of your articles or blogs, and 30% you're providing a surprise. See how many likes do you get, see how many downloads do you get, see how many shares, how many tweets with that proportion. Now start pushing things a little bit more. Take it 50-50. Do you get a similar number? Push it a little bit more in the other direction. Do you get different numbers? So data can inform some of those proportions a lot more than we can do guesses. Scott, thank you so much for inviting me. Please stay in touch. You have my email address here. If you're intrigued by, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you're intrigued by this, we have a webinar coming up, so there's information. And I guarantee that if you predict what people are going to do next, you will be able to meet it where the brain is already in the future. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much. All right, another round.